Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to another edition of Friday Night Live with me, Hafiz Shaban, this Friday evening. Friday the 14th of July 2023, corresponding to what I believe is the 26th of Zilhijjah 1444. Right, as usual, we are broadcasting live to Luton on 105.1 FM. We're also broadcasting live to our partner stations across the UK, including Sheffield Link FM, and also broadcasting to Peterborough, Salam, Derby, Nottingham. For listeners elsewhere in the UK, nationally and internationally, you can tune in to Inspire FM via the Inspire FM app, its website, and we are, as always, broadcasting live, streaming live on Facebook and YouTube. So do tune in tonight. Do remember to like us. Do remember to join tonight's conversation. Leave us your comments. Join tonight's conversation, discussion. Your thoughts, your opinions do count. Call me here directly in the studio on 01582 481 822. 01582 481 822. You can SMS or WhatsApp me on 07779 481 822. 07779 481 822. As always, we are bringing you some very, very lively stories on tonight's show. We are discussing a harrowing story, the harrowing genocide of more than 8,000 Muslims. 8,000 Muslims. It has been 27 years since the harrowing genocide of more than 8,000 Muslims between the ages of 7 and over 70 at Srebrenica, Bosnia, at the hands of Serbia's military. We will be discussing that furthermore with Dr. Uthman Latif. Dr. Uthman Latif, who has actually previously also, in conjunction with Muazzam Beg, given a crash course on Srebrenica in one of the podcasts, but it's also has written extensively in a number of different articles. We'll be discussing and exploring more with Dr. Uthman Latif with regards to that tragic event 27 years ago, the genocide of more than 8,000 Muslims in Europe, in the heart of Europe. And the question I'm going to be asking is, what lessons have been learned, if any, right? What actually happened, right? And the contradiction between what happened in Bosnia and the reaction we see to places like Ukraine today, right? Some of the questions that I'm going to be posing to Dr. Uthman Latif. If you've got a question to pose to him, you know the number to call. Right, in the second half an hour of the show, we are speaking to our brother Basharat Ali. We are speaking to brother Basharat Ali with regards to the news that the United States of America and the United Kingdom, surprise, vote against the UN resolution which calls for a ban on the burnings of the Quran or any other holy scriptures. Not a surprise at all, that is it? The UK-US voted against a UN resolution which was brought to the United Nations by Pakistan, right? A Pakistani-sponsored resolution which was calling for the banning of the burning of the Quran. We know that it has become a customary tradition by the far right across Europe to incite hatred, right? And specifically to kind of target the Muslims and Muslim sentiments, Muslim red lines, and by trying to provoke the Muslim community in those areas. We have seen it across Sweden on a number of occasions. We have seen it in other European countries also. And not surprising at all, most of these European countries voted against the UN resolution. So no surprises there. But we'll be exploring that story a bit further with brother Basharat Ali at 6:30. So that's the lineup for tonight. Do not go away. We will be going directly to Dr. Uthman Latif as we cover our first story very, very soon. Right, listeners, so as I was saying earlier, this week marked the harrowing 27 years. Allahu Akbar. You know, actually, I remember the events of Bosnia as I was a teenager. I remember those very, very vividly. And what actually transpired was more than 8,000 Muslims being massacred, males being massacred, lined up and massacred by the Serb militants on the 11th of July 1995. And this was after some of our younger listeners who are maybe not as familiar with history stretching back to 1995. The Muslims, the Bosnian Muslims, were actually entering into the eastern town of Srebrenica after it was declared a United Nations safe zone. So this was the responsibility of the United Nations safe zone to protect the people within that territory. And in fact, these so-called Dutch peacekeeping forces almost just walked away. These around 600 troops almost just literally walked away, allowing the Serb militants to massacre 8,000 plus Muslims. 27 years since that event. Europe's only acknowledged genocide since World War II, according to some, right? And now everyone is recognizing the absolute failure of the West, the absolute failure of the United Nations. United Nations Secretary General Antonio, he urges we acknowledge the terrible crime and the inaction of the international community. NATO remained complacent, indecisive, despite full knowledge of imminent genocide. Declassified CIA cables reveal that Britain and the US knew for 6 weeks that Srebrenica would fall. Right. So those are some of the key facts, key headlines before we go and speak to our guest and who will hopefully shed a bit more light on this topic, Dr. Usman Latif. Do we have Dr. Usman Latif? Yes, we do. Alhamdulillah. Dr. Usman Latif is, mashallah, BA degree holder in history. But actually what impresses me about Dr. Usman Latif is his MA and his PhD more, mashallah. MA in Crusader Studies. I think we need to discuss his MA in a future episode, definitely. And mashallah, his PhD in the Fada'il of Al-Quds, the merits of Jerusalem. So it's great to have brother Dr. Usman Latif with us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Friday Night Live.
Thank you for having me. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Right. So you heard the introduction. 27 years since this harrowing genocide of more than 8,000 Muslims. And you know what? I mean, a lot of my listeners could almost be forgiven, right? For actually missing this event, because it wasn't really covered much, was it, by the Western media? Why do we see so much indifference by the Western media when it comes to, what some have classified as the second genocide in Europe after World War II?
Yeah, well, it's been 28 years, in fact, from 1905 till today. There is, of course, a discourse of human suffering that castigates some people as worthy victims and others as unworthy victims, sadly. And so one of the rallying cries post-Holocaust, of course, was never again Auschwitz. But then, of course, that kind of does depend a lot, I think, on the way that we perceive of victimhood. And so there have been many genocides since Auschwitz, and one of them, of course, is in Bosnia, Srebrenica. And as you mentioned before, it was the worst human killing genocide since Second World War. So that means the world hasn't learned its lesson since the Holocaust.
Absolutely. And what about the Western media indifference then? It's almost is it a shame that hangs on the consciousness of the Western nations, and hence they don't really give it much attention at all? Or is it just a sheer hypocrisy?
Well, it's ironic, actually, because remember that the Bosnians are Slavic people, and so Slovenians, Croats, Bosnians are all Slavic people. And to have, of course, Bosnians castigated and singled out for mass execution and mass ethnic cleansing and mass murder, simply not because of the fact that they were white like the others, but because they couldn't see the whiteness in them. They saw the Islam in them as Muslims. And that's really the fundamental difference. The fact that they were Muslims, they were castigated as Turks, as people who embraced Islam. Remember, of course, that there were Muslims since the Ottoman times who embraced Islam, and that was seen as a great problem for them because they were described as genetically deformed material that embraced Islam, as cockroaches, as vermins, as nothingness, really, as a poison that has to be cleansed, as rats infestation that should be cleansed from the landscape of Bosnia. So what happened is that, since when the Yugoslavia broke up and you had all these smaller states seeking independence, the Serbs who kind of had the rallying cries of old ancient defeats against them from the Ottomans saw the Bosnians as an existential enemy, as an other enemy, for being Muslim and for being of those who in their minds come from that kind of Turkish background, and for that reason they sought to, in their minds, exact vengeance on them. And remember, of course, that we're not only speaking about Bosnia. Very close in our memory, of course, in 2019 was the massacre committed against the two masajid in Christchurch, New Zealand. More than 50 people, Muslims, were gunned to death. The one who did that, Brenton Tarrant, of course, was inspired by the Serbian nationalists who committed genocide in Bosnia. In fact, on his way to doing the process of killing the Muslims in the two masajid, he was with headphones hearing the songs of Serbian nationalist leaders. And in his manifesto called The Great Replacement, he speaks at great admiration of the Serbian nationalist leaders. And of course, the language is the same to drive out the Turks, from what he perceives as Western countries. And so the thing is, the discourse is the same, language is the same, and the goal is the same.
Right. So that's quite incredible and outrageous. But I mean, it actually leads on to a very logical next question, which is, what lessons do you think? I mean, in fact, before I go to what lessons, I mean, we've talked about the far right, we've talked about the Bosnian Serb nationalist, right tendencies that led to that kind of mentality and that kind of attitude towards the Muslims, and of course the massacre. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them all a Jannatul Firdaus. But what about the United Nations? Because the United Nations, whilst it, formally, wasn't charged with murder on its hand, but literally it just walked away. I mean, a lot of our younger listeners will not know the events of Bosnia and what happened in Bosnia, but us as a lot older, who actually were teenagers at that time, we very clearly, frankly, remember the images of our Muslim brothers and sisters in Bosnia and how the United Nations, simply so-called peacekeepers, walked away, but without any accountability.
Yes, the idea was that it's supposed to be peacekeeping troops, the Dutch and others amongst them as well, who were supposed to provide some kind of a safe haven for the Muslims in Bosnia, because the advancements of the Serbs, because they went from Croatia, Slovenia, and then lastly Bosnia, that they knew that impending genocide awaiting these innocent Muslims, but they didn't do anything to help them. And that's kind of something that's a reflection of bystanding, because whenever you have a genocide, you always have four groups of people that emerge. You always have the perpetrators, the victims, the bystanders, and then you have the rescuers. And so in this third category is a lot of people, because they simply bystand, and indifference, of course, flows through them. Sadly, of course, it's an indictment on the world's hypocrisy, as you mentioned before. The fact that we have some globalized attention towards some innocent victims in some parts of the world, and we have less attention on other parts of the world. This is something, of course, it's not new. It's something that's old. If you remember, of course, and you had, of course, Liberia in the 1990s, and you had the mass rape of innocent young girls, but the media focus was not on them, because it wasn't worthy enough as a news story. In the case of Bosnia, however, you're dealing with people who are white. They're actually white, but the Serbs couldn't see the whiteness in them as themselves. They only saw the Islam, in them, and for that reason they were butchered to death. And so many lessons. I mean, for us, of course, as Muslims, one of the fundamental lessons is to think about hadith, when the Prophet of Allah says that al-Muslimun, that the Muslims are like kajasadun wahid, like one body. If one part of it is in pain, the whole body feels the pain. Suffer from fever and sleeplessness. So one of the things is that remember that there was a mass globalized focus from the Muslims when Bosnia happened. Mujahideen came from everywhere, all parts of the world, all nationalities, and they came to help. They came to help the Muslims of Bosnia. And that's something that the Muslims of Bosnia remember about. They remember the fact that we were isolated, and yet all these Muslims, all Pakistanis, Arabs from Uzbekistan, all over the world, and the only bond that connected them was La ilaha illallah. The only bond, nothing else. It was not anything else except that they were Muslims, subhanAllah. And this is something only Islam produces, subhanAllah. And so even though we're very saddened by the fact that that happened, of course, there's still in Serbian society this sense of pride over Serbian war criminals. The other day I saw a video of the fact that the Bosnians are mourning, and the Serbs are playing loud music, venerating what they perceive as being the heroism of Serb national leaders. And so that's happening. We're going to have hate. You're going to have shaitan is always there. But the point is that the Muslim Ummah has to become strong, has to have that sense of profound empathy and love for one another, has to unify its ranks. It's within unity, because unity, the Prophet of Allah says, is strength, and division is weakness and punishment. And so whenever we're divided like that, of course, is reflective of the fact that we're weak, and so therefore we're easy prey. And so Bosnia should teach us, therefore, that lesson.
All right, listeners, we are discussing 28 years, in fact, not 27, but 28 years since the harrowing genocide of more than 8,000 Muslims in Srebrenica, Bosnia, at the hands of Serbia's military. 11th of July 1995, right? Europe's only so-called acknowledged genocide since World War II. Right, I want to hear your thoughts. 01582 481822 0779 We are in conversation with Dr. Uthman Latif, who is joining us to discuss this in a lot more detail. We've got about 7 minutes remaining, and I've got about 4 questions, quick fire questions for you, Dr. Uthman Latif. And really open, honest conversation. Do you firstly think lessons have been learned from the events of Bosnia?
No, I don't think so. I think the fact that there's still mass killing and slaughter in our world today is a reflection of the fact that we haven't learned the lessons. I was in Auschwitz, Birkenau, just a few years ago, instantly, when Syria was happening. And our Polish tour guide in Birkenau, she ended the whole tour by saying that the fact that Syria is happening still is a proof that the world didn't learn its lesson from the Holocaust. And that shows that sense of indifference, cruelty that we inflict on others, the world hasn't learned its lesson from that.
I think the world is one thing. What about Europe? I know when I talk of Europe, I even talk of it in a loose sense, because I include America in that. I include some of the leading nations, the Western nations in the world. Have they actually learned any lessons from a tragedy like this, of this proportion, within the heart of Europe happening?
I don't think so. I think there's been some attempts at like positive reconciliation. That kind of stuff happens anyway. Whatever happens. But I think that on the whole, even a European sense, those lessons haven't been learned, because remember that the Bosnians still feel victimized in Bosnia. They still feel as if the attention hasn't been paid to them as worthy victims. They still feel as if the war criminals are gloating still in some society. There's been, of course, some people like Radovan Karadzic and Karadzic are being prosecuted, but others have not. And there's a lot of them still celebrated in society, and therefore that's not being acknowledged by the European community of leaders. And therefore,
so that was going to be a follow-up question, which is, in Bosnia, I mean, I still read ethnic tensions still persist, right? With Bosnian Serbs continuing to push for more independence and their open calls for separation, for example, right? So what's the, I mean, to what extent has that reconciliation that you actually discussed? Okay, there have been steps in that direction, but
yeah, there's always steps by NGOs. But the thing about it hasn't happened, in fact, in Bosnia. It happened in Rwanda in quite a productive way, but in Bosnia you still have that sense of deeply entrenched hatred still in many parts of some society. And I think that it goes back to old ancient grudges. In
Yeah.
1389, when you had Murad I defeat the Serbian leader, what's his name, Lazarus, I think his name was, and it was defeat. And then both, in fact, leaders died in that battle of Kosovo. But the Muslims, Ottomans, won the battle, and the Serbians therefore have this rallying cry, because even when the war crimes were taking place, they were recounting the songs of the battle of the Prince Lazarus. There were the blackbirds, and this kind of, they have this memory of what they perceive as their heroism and martyrdom.
No, absolutely, I get that, but I was going to actually say, I mean, when we talk about reconciliation and we talk about tension still persisting, I mean, you can stretch that out to the whole of Europe at the moment, right? And the right-wing tendencies that we're finding. I mean, the next story that we're going to be discussing is the Quran burning in Sweden. I mean, this is becoming a tradition of the far right across Europe, right? In the guise of freedom of expression and freedom of speech. But we know what the real aim behind that is. So when you're talking about reconciliation on the one hand, and then on the other hand, you're talking about, you got the you got Islamophobia, you got anti-Islamic, policies and law and legislation, draconian legislation, and you got these kind of events that are happening. That reconciliation and conversation of reconciliation is very superficial.
It hasn't happened, and it won't happen. That's the thing. And I think that, like you mentioned, the evidence on the contrary, because of the rights of the far right, they see Muslims as fair game, and the continuation of provocation, the Quran burning, insulting Prophet ﷺ. It was happening in France. What happened with the young boy who was gunned down, for example, and the fact that Arabs and darker skinned people are more fair game. And remember, that's kind of a discourse, because in projecting the Bosnians as Turks, the idea was that Turks are darker skinned, even though the Bosnians are not. But the fact that the Turks are like the Moors, they're like the darker skinned, the more savage, less civilized, and they use these kind of tropes to justify in their minds mass murder and execution.
So we've got about 3 minutes remaining. Two last very quick questions, and this is a bit of a deep question, but I want your honest opinion. What is the probability of such a massacre happening in Europe again?
Well, there is. We should always be prepared for that. I think that there are, of course, the rising of ethnic tensions of the far right against persecuted minorities, has happened in some European countries. So we should not be docile. We should not be ignorant. We should learn from history. We should learn from mistakes of the past. We should be safeguarded. We should be protected. So therefore, I think that we shouldn't go into life with closed eyes thinking that these things can't happen, because they happen overnight in Bosnia, and they happen when neighbors turned on neighbors. I'm not saying it's going to happen in England, for example, but what I'm saying is that we should always be on guard as Muslims. Allah in the Quran says, take your precautions. So we don't, of course, want that anything to happen like that, but we have seen a lot of that happen in our recent memory.
I mean, it's connected to earlier what we were discussing about lessons learned. I mean, the probability of such a massacre happening, a lot of people will say, look, that's ridiculous, and that will never happen. But let's look on the face of it. As you said, when it comes to Bosnia, I remember in the 80s and 90s, our attitudes of Britain and freedom and liberty and all of these concepts, and we could never imagine the draconian legislation and how quickly that would transpire as it has over the last, post 9/11. And
well,
what happened?
Things can turn overnight. Remember that in Rwanda, it all happened overnight when an airplane crashed carrying the presidents of Rwanda and Burundi. Overnight, you had this genocide. Overnight, teachers turning on the students on the teachers, and like what happened in Bosnia, you had people who were close to one another, neighbors turn on their neighbors, and therefore they forget that this is, of course, the cruel reality of nationalism, because national identity takes center stage over familial bonds sometimes, or friendship groups. It's about the curse of nationalism.
Right. And the last question is there something even further underlying this whole conversation, and that is European acceptance of the Muslim populace within Europe, right? And is that an issue for Europe to actually come to accepting the Muslims and the Muslim identity, because they know that the Muslims are very distinct, very different. We live harmoniously and we want to coexist, but yet we have got our own unique identity. You've only got 30 seconds, unfortunately, to answer this question. Is that a problem with Europe?
In some parts of Europe, for sure. I think the fact that you've had these recent provocations on drawing the Prophet ﷺ, in characterizing, in insulting, in Quran burning, and I want to say, it's a reflection of the bravery and the goodness of the Muslim spirit, the fact that we can hold our ground in these very important cases, because if we didn't, then of course it reflects weakness from us.
Right, Dr. Usman Latif, fantastic, very concise, very precise. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Jazakallah khair for joining us on Friday Night Live. Great having this conversation with you, and inshallah we'll speak to you again, no doubt. Right, listeners, that was Dr. Usman Latif. A very, very intriguing, very, very interesting conversation there with regards to 28 years since the harrowing genocide of more than 8,000 Muslims in Serbia, in Bosnia. Don't go away. We'll be right back after the commercial break. This is Friday Night Live with me, Hafiz Shaban.
This program will continue after the break. Continue listening to Inspire FM. Inspire FM.
Inspire 105.1 FM.
Hello, my name is Shadia. I'm from Luton. Keep tuned into Inspire FM 105.1 FM.
AK Windows South Limited, manufacturers and installers of high-quality UPVC windows and doors, bifold doors, composite doors, conservatories, porches, skypods, fascias, guttering, and much, much more. We specialize in double glazing and triple glazing using the best German profile. If you want quality at affordable prices, AK Windows is the place to go. If your house needs a facelift, you know who to trust. For a free quote, call AK Windows today on 01582 483 777 or visit us at Unit 10E, Britannia Estate, Leagrave Road, Luton.
Looking for a law firm that doesn't treat you like you're just any client and charge you excessive fees? At MB Solicitors, we're not just interested in your case, we're interested in you. Our lawyers work to get you the right result with personal injury, immigration, family, and civil litigation services. At MB Solicitors, we won't treat you like a client, we'll treat you like the client. So call Luton 415-836 or visit mbsolicitors.com to arrange your free consultation today.
Had an accident, a bump, trip or fall? Then you need Claims Specialists, your first choice for accident claims. The Specialist Claims Company on Dunstable Road in Luton. With excellent access to expert solicitors and on a no-win, no-fee basis, Claims Specialists use their 30 years experience to help get you the best compensation possible. For injuries at work, taxi, PCO and private hire incidents, road accidents and vehicle damage, medical negligence, plus rented housing disrepair. In short, when you need to make any claim, click on claimspecialists.co.uk or call 01582 733 222.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من يحرم الرفق يحرم الخير, that whoever is deprived of gentleness is deprived of good.
After 12 years of conflict, Syria has been devastated by 2 deadly earthquakes. Thousands of families suffer without shelter in the freezing cold. Human Appeal makes the most of your mercy. Following the earthquakes, we moved 1,000 Syrians into permanent homes. Now we need your help to build even more homes. Give mercy now. Visit humanappeal.org.uk or call 0161 225 0225.
We always want to know how to look after our health or the health and well-being of our loved ones. We always like to know what are the best exercise to adopt, or we want to know how to access certain health services. We address these and many similar health-related queries and advice in the Health and Fitness Show with me, Fahad Mateen, on every Thursday at 6 p.m.
From the studios of Inspire FM, the time is now 6:30.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Friday Night Live with me, Hafiz Shaban, this Friday early evening. It is 6:30 p.m. It is 14th of July 2023, corresponding to the 26th of Zilhijjah 1444. As usual, we are broadcasting live to Luton on 105.1 FM, and we're also broadcasting live across our partner stations, including Sheffield Link FM. For listeners across the UK, nationally, internationally, you can tune into Inspire FM. You can tune into Friday Night Live via the Inspire FM app, website. And last but not least, we're streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, and other social media platforms. Remember to like tonight's show. Do remember to join tonight's conversation. Leave us your comments. Do leave us your comments. I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts, your emotions, your sentiments, your frustrations. 01582 481 822. Call me and let them all out. 01582 481 822. 0779 481 822. Now that's the number if you want to send me an SMS, WhatsApp message. I am live here in the studio and I can read out those messages, hopefully, inshallah ta'ala, if you get them to me within the next half an hour. We were speaking to Dr. Usman Latif earlier. Brilliant guest, mashallah. Good work, team, for lining up that guest there. We were discussing 28 years. Now, did you know this? This week marked 28 years since the harrowing genocide of more than 8,000 Muslims in Srebrenica. Bosnian Muslims, 8,000 plus in Srebrenica on the 11th of July 1995. Now, many of us would have just simply not even realized that this actually event happened 28 years ago, because it was really not given any coverage by Western media at all, if any at all. But anyway, that's what we were discussing earlier. If you do want to follow that story, and I do recommend that you actually listen to that story, it will be available straight after the show, and you will be able to go and listen to that story, follow that story on the social media platforms, inshallah. Right, we're going to move on to our next story. And our next story, we are discussing how the United States and the United Kingdom, and most of the European countries for that matter, voted against a UN resolution calling for the ban on burning the Quran. Right now, you would think that that is fairly a reasonable ask, right? Especially when you got such a sizable population of Muslims living in UK, living in the United States, living across Europe. But in fact, that doesn't matter to France. It doesn't matter to the United States. It doesn't matter to the United Kingdom. It doesn't matter to the Czech Republic, Finland, France, Luxembourg, Belgium, etc., because they all voted against the resolution. It was a Pakistani-sponsored resolution, right? And the idea was to bring it to the United Nations Human Rights Council and try to get this passed. I think it did pass, but of course, it had all of these European nations voting against it. Now, it's the irony and the hypocrisy of all of this. That's the conversation that we need to have. And I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear my listeners, your thoughts, right? And of course, this comes on the back of not only the recent desecration of the Holy Quran, right, on the 28th of June. This is an incident that happened on the 28th of June, a reference to an incident in Sweden last month that, of course, triggered protests across the Muslim world, right? But Sweden is not the only country playing this very shallow, very hollow, and a very, very primitive provocation, incitement of the Muslim community. I mean, what do they really want to achieve? What do they actually want to demonstrate? What does it actually attain at all, right? But it's not only Sweden that's at it. It's happening in France. It's happening in Belgium. It's happening in Germany. It's happening even here in the United Kingdom, right? So it's happening all over Europe. If it hasn't happened, there are threats to make it happen, and there's a tendency across these countries. Anyway, the UK and the US voted against the UN resolution calling for a ban on this incitement of the Muslims. With us tonight, inshallah, is Brother Basharat Ali. I don't know if Bashar has joined. I think he has joined. Excellent. Great to see you, Brother Bashar. Brother Bashar, just very quickly, is a solicitor advocate by profession, I believe, inshallah. He's also a presenter on Islam Channel. Your views on the news. I think it's a show every Wednesday on Islam Channel. He's a writer, he's a speaker, he's a columnist, he's a radio presenter, he's a contributor, mashallah. He's a very, very active individual, let's put it that way, right? So great to have Brother Bashar. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Bashar. Welcome to Friday Night Live.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much for having me. How are you, Shaban?
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Not too bad, akhi. Good to see you too, mashallah. All right. So earlier we were discussing, I'm sure you would have been very interested in commenting on that, but we were discussing earlier 28 years since the harrowing genocide of more than 8,000 Muslims in Bosnia, and we were talking about have lessons been learned, and Dr. Uthman Latif said unfortunately no lessons have been learned, right? And we can actually see the tendencies and the events across Europe and the European countries, and the trend and the trajectory of what's happening, and this latest incitement in Sweden of burning the Quran, and like I said, it's been happening in other countries. We saw what happened in France just very recently. We know the attitude towards Islam, Islamophobia, and I put that question very frankly to Dr. Usman Latif. Does Europe have an attitude problem? Does it have a real problem when it comes to Muslims in the Muslim community? Yes or no? He gave me his opinion, but let's have this conversation. The UK, the US, no surprise, a lot of the other European countries all voted against the UN resolution calling for a ban on Quran burnings, right? I mean, I had a quote here, if I can find it earlier. They disagreed with the definition and an infringement to their freedom. And what do you make of it, Brother Bashar?
Bismillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. To be very frank with you, it's hypocrisy, full stop. And there's no other word for it. I mean, I don't need to waste my breath. The way the United Kingdom has imprisoned people for, not imprisoned, they have committed people of criminal offences. For example, in England, poppy burners. I don't say that we should burn poppies and say horrible things to people who are commemorating their war dead. Similarly, in Scotland, you remember when Captain or Colonel Tom Moore, he got a malicious tweet. And some Scottish person who sent that, burn in hell or something silly like that, I can't remember what it was. That person also was charged with a criminal offence under the, I think, Malicious Communications Act or something. So, cut a long story short, it's not about not wanting to protect sanctities and symbols. It's we won't protect your sanctities and your symbols.
So are you telling me I can't burn a poppy on the 11th of November, but I can burn a copy of the Quran on the 11th of November? Is that what we're saying?
You ought not to burn. You ought not to burn either, because our guide is Al Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and not people who follow their own whims and desires. And to be very frank with you, the way that look at the rabble that go by the name of politicians and prime ministers and presidents. I mean, honestly, do they represent the majority of the people of this country? I don't know. But the issue comes down to this, that there is blatant hypocrisy because certain sanctities are valued and others are not. And the Islamic position, and what I would say should be a fair position by any fair-minded human being, is either you protect all sanctities or you don't protect any. Then you have a principled position. But when you pick and choose, it is, as you said, you mentioned Dr. Uthman Latif, a very dear friend and a brother. His view is absolutely right, because what happened in Bosnia, Mitterrand and the John Major government, they dilly-dallied and delayed while the Slovenians and the Croatians were getting support from other European countries. It was, I think, Mitterrand was quoted something along the lines because he had problems with the Muslims. So Europe, in terms of government level, not your neighbor, my neighbor, your friend, my friends, people we work with, there's a big distinction to be drawn here, because common people everywhere in the world see the hypocrisy of this. But governments successively have had a hypocritical, anti-Islamic viewpoint.
All right, I found the quote here. The United States and the European Union said the resolution conflicts with their positions on human rights and freedom of expression. Now, listen to this. The US ambassador at large for international religious freedom, ideally it's a Rashad Hussain, right? Quote, we know from experience that attempting a ban on such expression actually usually amplifies it further by bringing even more attention to it, and often serves as a catalyst for further hatred. Very interesting individual that they've chosen as the US ambassador at large for international religious freedom to make such a statement. Do you buy that at all?
Not at all. Look, if you encourage people to insult, look, unfortunately, in many countries, in the United Kingdom, the US, they have this idea you can insult, you can offend. Now, intelligent human beings don't need to insult and offend each other gratuitously and deliberately to have an intelligent conversation. The fact, if I don't use expletives, I don't go out of my way to offend you, and if you happen to take offense at an argument, that's a difference. No problem there, because ultimately, if you have a deep theological, political, social discussion, people may find what you say objectionable. Nothing wrong with that. People may disagree with you. Not a problem. But the issue comes down to this, that the whole context of this, of course, goes back to European enlightenment and the fact that in Europe, you really couldn't criticize anyone. Whereas Islam and the Muslims have had that obligation to criticize when somebody, you know, the famous hadith, Man ra minkum munkaran falyughayyir biyadihi fa in lam yastati' fa bilisanihi, that any one of you, whoever it is, whatever munkar, evil, wickedness you see, try and stop it with your hand. If you cannot speak up, you're commanded with manners, with intelligence, with wisdom. Not, I mean, you know, honestly, the idea is, it's lost on me in terms of intelligence and rationality. I know what they say, I know what they do. I can't see at all any justification for that.
All right. So let's put some context around this resolution itself. Let's also put some context around what is happening across Europe. I mean, if I just do a cursory Google search on Quran burnings, right? And you know, you find all sorts of things that come up, right? I mean, Sweden's got a real a real history, right, when it comes to Quran burnings. I mean, 2020, 2023, you know, you name it, you know, it's got a history to it, as of some of the other European countries, right? So there seems to be a trend going on over here, right? And it seems like any protests that are happening are falling on deaf ears, right? And in fact, if you look at the individuals, right, that are actually, you know, spearheading these provocative, you know, stances and these deliberate actions, it's very interesting to actually see who actually financially sponsors these individuals to actually do that, right? Because even the ones who are the chap that actually got sponsored and actually got the license to allow him to carry out that was actually sponsored by a right hand, you know, sort of politician or a broadcaster or someone who's got affiliations and links to right-wing political parties, right? But what is this this trend that we're seeing across Europe, Brother Bashar? What does it tell you from your perspective?
What it tells you, there are two aspects of this. First of all, we don't tar every European with the same brush. There are people who disagree with this, and there's a substantial proportion of the population, depending on where you are, that it will fluctuate. Number two, when you ask the question, why is it being done? You know, when any society stands up and defends itself, most countries, the Muslim societies, in terms of the people, are rightly disgusted by this. And the states, there is a big gulf. They will give or pay mere lip service, but in reality, they have not got the wherewithal or the guts or the courage to actually do anything about it. I mean, look, Recep Tayyip Erdogan famously says a lot of things, and then the Swedish Prime Minister and him have a deal, they're part of NATO.
Well, now, you've just taken my next question out my mouth, Brother Bashar, but anyway, go on.
No, the short point here is that when you love someone, and the Prophet ﷺ said, "La yu'minu ahadukum hatta akuna habba ilayhi min waladihi wa walidihi wan nasi ajma'in." No one of you has any iman until I'm more beloved to you than your children, your parents, and anyone. And the Quran and the Sunnah go hand in glove. Whether it's Charlie Hebdo insulting the Prophet ﷺ, whether it was Jylland Posten in Denmark, whether it's what's happening in Sweden, whether it's what's happening elsewhere in Europe, humanity needs to rise up. It needs to raise its level, that human beings actually behave in a civilized way. We are the finest of creation. Not that we have a horrible race to the bottom, So under the pretext of so-called freedom of speech, by the way, there is no such thing. There are hundreds of laws that restrict what you can say, what you can print, what you can broadcast, what you can publish. It's a lie. What it is that, well, because it's what we don't want to protect. That's how it goes. Whereas in Islam, we are prohibited from insulting anybody or anybody's sanctities or their symbols of their faith. It's a simple thing because it's not intelligent. And so there is a value deficit. That you because what's the objective, they say, of freedom of speech?
All right, looks like we've.
Why must you have the right to offend anyone? Because the justification is false. And if it's based upon European experience of the church and the state being in collusion and the common man and woman not being...
We're getting a lot of interception. Okay, speak now.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that the justification for it doesn't exist.
Do you want to try to just leave and then rejoin? I think we're getting a lot of interference.
I'll do that right away.
All right, listeners, whilst we get Brother Bashar reconnected, we are discussing currently the UK and US vote against the UN resolution calling for a ban on the Quran burnings. We were discussing earlier with regards to the genocide of 8,000 plus Muslims in Srebrenica in Bosnia 28 years ago. If you've got any views on what's been discussed, 01582481822. 01582481822. Right, I can see Brother Bashar. I'm going to go straight back to Brother Bashar. Hopefully, we've got rid of that interference now that Brother Bashar speaks. Let's have a quick test of the mic. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Bashar. Welcome back.
Walaikum salam.
Yeah, it is clear this time, inshallah. Right, you were discussing something. I lost the last thread that we were on, but it was probably related to the question that I was going to ask anyway, which is one of the headlines I read was that Kuwait responds to the Quran burning. I don't know if you saw this, right? Kuwait responds to Quran burning by gifting 100,000 copies of the Quran to Sweden. Right, so that's one reaction we've seen. On the other hand, as you were saying earlier, is a favorite for a lot of people for whatever reasons. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan, right? He strongly criticizes Sweden with his right hand for allowing the incident to occur. But on the left hand, right, we know that he's working hand in hand with Sweden, and he's currently supporting that, and he is in fact endorsed and has agreed to support support Sweden's bid to join NATO. The military alliance chiefs, Johns Stoltenberg says, right? Yeah, so on the one hand, on the right hand side, we're hearing all this rhetoric, but on the other side, we're seeing that they're working hand in hand when it comes to other policies. So how significant is the Quran to these individuals? Some people will say, well, he's in a very difficult situation, right? He needs to do the politicking and do what is in the national interest for Turkey, but at the same hand, he needs to issue some rhetoric. On the other hand, most of the other Muslim countries, I mean, Kuwait responds by giving 100,000 copies of the Quran to Sweden. I mean, I can't really see the intelligence behind that. Perhaps if it leveraged the oil that it has, it may have a bit more of an effect, right? But what are your thoughts on some of these?
There are a few quick points. Number one, the fact that these sick and perverted people burn the Quran, it says more about them than it says about the Quran. They cannot reason with the Quran. They cannot debate with the Quran. They cannot argue. If any of them want to do that, we're ready. There are Muslims who are up and down this land and the world over. Name your place, name your time, let's have it. If you have got intelligence, come, let's talk. Because that will be the real test of your intelligence and your confidence in yourself. So this is a pathetic thing. Number two, just as these people are burning the Quran, the Muslim lands and Muslim rulers metaphorically burn and rip pages out of the Quran because they ignore the ahkamat, the rules, they ignore the injunctions. And so, quite frankly, they're burning it every day metaphorically anyway. In terms of the Kuwait, you mentioned, I think you actually hit the nail on the head, because the modern day God of the nation state, which is a God, is all powerful, it's all supreme, And therefore, each of these rulers, they are beholden to the national interest. Whereas the West comes together. Look at Ukraine. Look at their position against China. They have a common viewpoint, a common aqidah, common belief. Even though there's division, competition, when it comes to fundamental core interests, it's one. And so, if Muslims have that mindset, a global market of 1.8 billion, the most strategic locations on the planet. You mentioned oil, gas, minerals. You know the new gold is what goes in batteries. Everything that depends on semiconductor chips. A lot of these things are under Muslim lands. We're not here to invade anyone. We're saying, listen, if you unify the thinking, unify the diplomacy, it's very simple. Other ones, predecessor 120 years ago had a play cancelled when they said it's freedom of speech. He said, well, look, either it's that or we're going to war. We're going to break diplomatic relations, and the play will stop. Why? Because we want to take humanity. The whole point here is that we want people to think, to understand. And if they see the beauty of the Quran being implemented, then they can see the fruits of the Quran. But when they see, I love the Quran, I'm really going to get angry this time, and then, okay, well, I'm not so angry.
Yeah.
It's a mockery.
All right. Okay. So, I mean, it's an interesting angle, actually, what you said earlier. Deliberate provocation, very pathetic, signs of weakness and failure, because there's no intellectual discourse here. And there's no attempt for intellectual discourse. So it's clear that it's obviously a deliberate act of provocation. I mean, that actually begs the question, how should Muslims respond to such provocation, right? I mean, we see the general masses in the Muslim countries going out and demonstrating, right? And they've been doing that for years, right? And I'm not going to say it's a bad thing to do. It's good. They're showing their emotion, they're showing their sentiments, they're out on the streets, and they're repeatedly out on their streets showing their solidarity, support, etc., right? But we see that we're not hitting the nail on the head quite. I mean, even in this case, Pakistan is the one who was actually, presenting this, bill to the United Nations, right? This resolution, right? So maybe, some people would argue that there's a bit of an achievement there. It's actually passed. So, okay, despite the objections, it's some kind of some segment of success. Someone can argue. But how should the Muslims really respond, right, to these kind of provocations? I mean, how do we respond as a community living in Britain, in Europe, because we can't respond in the same way necessarily as the Muslims in the Muslim country? What's your advice to people listening to us?
If you're being goaded, if you're being drawn into a trap, the Prophet ﷺ famously said after Uhud, the Muslim is not bitten in the same hole twice. We're not immature, emotional people. Look, it hurts us if anyone should insult Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam.
No.
It offends us rightly and hurts us when they burn the Quran, because this is the speech of their creator and our creator, the creator of the universe. So we should translate that into an intellectual and rational response as individuals. So I do that regularly. So just justify to me, explain to me why you can convict somebody for burning a poppy or saying that Tom Moore should, rot in hell or something, and then you will say it's only a book, it's only a person who died a few years ago. So well, hold on, the people you're commemorating died in a war. So the Prophet is dead. The parity exists, and a poppy is a symbol. So at the end of the day, we need to show the irrationality and the weakness, and to say, look, this is not behavior fit for a human being as individuals. And those people that want to burn the Quran, they say, well, come. You don't like this book. Obvious. So now, why don't we compare your belief that you say that allows you to burn books, which are sacred, although not all books, the Torah wasn't burnt, and nor should it be burnt. As Muslims, we don't have they did, we should. No, absolutely not. We have the best of teachers, Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and we follow his example. So in the way I look at these things, is that's the individual response. In terms of states, look, diplomacy and statecraft, a lot of the Muslim rulers, their actions are more for domestic consumption than for external consumption. They know very well the West doesn't give two hoots about what they think. They don't even respect most of these rulers, to be very frank. So
Yeah.
I think if anything is welcome. I'm not here to dismiss what anybody says because who knows, there may be some benefit in that. So the fact that somebody spoke up is welcome, but there's no substance behind that because it has no effect.
All right, Brother Basharat, Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much. On that note, we have actually run out of time. Great having you on Friday Night Live. Jazakallah khair. Until next time, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Right, listeners, unfortunately, we have now run out of time. We've got about 30 seconds away from the end of the show. Jazakallah khair to all of those who participate in tonight's show. Jazakallah khair to Brother Basharat for joining us, and earlier Dr. Usman Latif. Great to have those panelists with me tonight. The show will be available inshallah very, very shortly, so those of you that missed the show are able to actually listen to it online. We will make that available as usual, and until next week, it's assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh for me, Hafiz Shaban, on Friday Night Live. Until next week, assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. In Luton and its surrounding area.